Hi guys, and welcome back to another behind the scenes process video. Sorry it's been so long since the last video. I've had way too many irons in the fire. Not 100% sure why that means I have too much to do. Do you take the irons out of the fire? Anyway, I've been really busy, so I'm glad to be back and sharing another video with you. I'm gonna be honest with you guys up top. This video and the process of making this piece has been a total mess. So what we're getting here is a little bit of a Frankenstein production today. Apologies. So recently I purchased a little Pico projector, and for this piece the original idea I had was to project the image of the rooster on a piece of paper and have that projection up the whole time that I'm drawing the chicken in, and that way I'm able to use really bold mixed media marks and be pretty wild with it, but still always have that reference of the form of the chicken to look back to, so I'd really be able to get wild but still maintain accuracy. Somehow I totally lost track of that idea in the soupy whirlpool of my thoughts around the piece once it actually became time to do it. And so I started mocking up potential compositions on my iPad that really just had nothing to do with that concept. It was more about focusing on how I was going to use the watercolor effect of the activated wax pastels, and I just got really tight about forming the composition that way. I feel like my work often suffers when I get too tight with things, and I think that's part of what happened here and why I struggled a lot with getting a finished piece out of this reference and out of this whole process. Tellingly, I decided to make the piece about quote-unquote focus. I wanted the body of the chicken to be painted / drawn in with kind of crazy wild mixed media like I was describing earlier, and then have the head / face be super detailed and in focus. And part of that would be the shapes in the watercolor texture to contrast but also to ground the different approaches to mark making, kind of unifying but also contrasting. On my first attempt, I taped off the shapes and then drew those in, filled them in with wax pastel, activated it with water, and then I got some ants in my pants and I took off the tape too soon and the paper totally ripped and I had to start all over. On my second attempt, I updated the composition so that it was wider and shorter. More of the chicken would be in the composition itself. And then I also used a different type of paper. On the first attempt, and then on the third final attempt that we'll get to, I used the Arches oil paper, and the watercolor texture is a little more subtle, and there's a lot of depth and richness to the colors when you use the Arches oil paper. On this second attempt, I used the Strathmore mixed media paper, and the watercolor really sits more on the surface with a stronger texture to it and a bit less depth. I wasn't really sure about that lack of depth or the composition really. I wanted more of the background watercolor texture to show through in the form of the chicken, so I just really wasn't sure about this second attempt. So, after activating with water, I started over yet again for the third time, moving back to the Arches oil paper. Because I still had a fully dry and composed watercolor background for the piece on the Strathmore, the second attempt, I decided to do a quote-unquote practice version to test things out and see what kind of mark making worked and what I liked. And as this was a practice piece, I didn't film the process thoroughly. I also worked really loosely, improvising a lot and taking more risks. So, of course, I ended up liking the direction and really committing to the piece. Once this guy was done, I moved on to the third attempt, the second one on the Arches oil paper. For this one, I wanted to have more of a focused approach. I wanted patterns and shapes in the body, and then a really detailed face / head under the aqua rectangle. I hadn't used oil pastel in a while, and so I wanted to use them, and I thought it would be a good medium for the detailed face / head, but as it turns out, it was the totally wrong medium for the shapes and patterns. I should have used the wax pastels and activated the ends of them with water so that it was more opaque and it went on a little thicker. Oil pastels are just too chunky for this to look good and not just kind of sloppy and childish. It really skips over the surface of the paper and doesn't make consistent enough width of line for patterns or shapes to really look good and clean. So after consternating about it for a couple hours and really trying to decide if it was worth totally starting over again for a fourth time, I decided not, and that I would try to undo what I had done with the oil pastel so far using a mixture of Gamsol and linseed oil as solvent, and rubbing that all over and diffusing it and then trying to wipe it up. It just made it really muddy and shitty looking, to be honest. I got super frustrated and ended up ripping up the paper. Oops. So here we are with the second quote-unquote practice attempt as my final piece. This one worked, I think, because I approached it much more loosely, changing my style, technique, and mediums for whatever was most appropriate in the given situation rather than just arbitrarily sticking to one that I wanted to work with. I started at the tail and worked my way up to the head. I wanted to create a kind of a quote-unquote landscape out of the lines and marks in the background that blended with the form of the chicken and also the watercolor effects that I had going out of the chicken. I wanted to give the impression of the rooster on a mission, but also kind of surrounded by distractions and things to hide behind and to be hidden from. I ended up really filling in the watercolor area, especially in the chicken, because of that lack of depth and value. It looked really pale next to the pastels, so I ended up filling most of that in. I saved the face for last. I ended up thinking that the piece looked kind of cool without the face. It was kind of like the rooster was walking behind a tube full of mystery liquid in a laboratory. So I wanted to put the face in really subtly, and I decided that colored pencil would be a nice way of making the face both subtle and accurate. This finished piece makes me think of a rooster in the wild, in quote-unquote the search of something, while trying to stay guarded and ready for surprises around any turn, which is definitely a feeling I can strongly relate to these days. Apologies again for the Frankenstein video, but it really is a true behind-the-scenes look at all the ups and downs, guts and glory of a real day in the studio. Thank you for watching my video, you guys. If you'd like to see my behind-the-scenes content right when it comes out, please check out my Patreon, link in description. Alrighty, till next time, bye.